Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, divided loyalties in Ukraine, both in the population and the media covering the story there. Not so fast. TV slows down in Norway, and the ratings go through the roof. North Korean media do their duty and officially scrub Kim Jong-un's uncle off the web. And
you're making a list, they're checking it twice.
The NSA wants to know who's been naughty and who's been nice.
The NSA is coming to town.
When protests erupted in the Ukrainian capital Kiev a month ago against the government of President Viktor Yanukovych, that power struggle was played out across the country's airwaves and around the world. Domestic state media have been accused of backing the government's narrative and its decision to pull out of a partnership deal with the European Union, as well as failing to tell the story of a protest movement demanding a geopolitical shift westwards. Demonstrators were portrayed as hooligans. Scores of the journalists covering them were attacked. That added to concerns about growing media censorship in Ukraine as Yanukovych attempts to solidify his hold on power. Then there's the Russian media, much of it state-owned, which gave this story round-the-clock coverage for its millions of viewers both in Russia and Ukraine. Protest numbers were downplayed, and the West was accused of funding the uprising. The Kremlin's propaganda machine has moved into overdrive to preserve its relationship with its former republic and age-old ally. Our starting point this week is Kiev. The first big story to come out of the protests was the political one. The size of the demonstrations, the scale of political dissent over the Yanukovych government's position on negotiations with the EU. Then came the media side of the story. At least 51 journalists, local and international, accusing the police of beating them. And so far, not a single arrest, charge, let alone a conviction.
That amount of journalists who really suffered and were beaten is incredible. It never happened in the Ukrainian history. It was shocking for the media community, and nobody is really punished.
As victims said, the cruelty of riot police representatives increased when press representatives said, please do not beat us. We are from the press. And the riot police replied, I will show you the freedom of speech.
It is difficult for me to say whether they were specifically targeting journalists, whether the police had a specific task to do that. Those who intentionally put themselves in danger and were down there in the rallies, naturally the police did not differentiate between them and the protesters. They were beating absolutely everyone.
The reporting of the story on Ukraine's state-owned TV channel, Pershi Nationalny, has been decidedly pro-government. However, few Ukrainians bother to watch that channel. There are 7 privately owned outlets more popular with viewers. Like corporate-owned media in the West, they are owned by oligarchs. And even the government's opponents admit the private channels have been fairly objective in their coverage. Ukrainians have a much bigger problem with what's coming out of Moscow on Russian-language newscasts beamed into Ukraine.
Well, Russian media is, of course, much more Kremlin-controlled. We had the same line about foreign interference, about money being paid to demonstrators. Nobody demonstrating for virtuous reasons. They're always assumed to be puppets of someone else. Putin tried a pretty much the same line when he faced protests in Moscow in 2011, 2012. It was all got up by the Americans or foreign money. And we're seeing the same line again.
If you live in Ukraine, you really know that it's silly, it has nothing to do with the reality. Everybody should be aware that it's very influential, and the Russian audience actually learn what has happened from this kind of media outcast, which almost nothing has to do with truth. And that's how the Russian population perceive the news from Ukraine without any evidence or proofs or fact, anything.
There have been some tense moments in the protest zone. Ukrainians surrounding Russian correspondents telling them they should be ashamed of their reporting. Perhaps making the point most effectively was the Ukrainian reporter who interrupted a live feed by a Russian correspondent from Rossiya 24 to present him with an Oscar, presumably for best performance in a supporting role.
This story with the Oscar is very interesting because those on the streets have stressed constantly that these are peaceful protests. So they somehow needed to protest against the Russian media peacefully, and that's why they came up with this mock Oscar presentation. It was brilliant, especially as it was actually broadcast live on air.
Now, giving a mock Oscar, well, that's wonderful for us in media. It sends a message, I guess, to show one side covering the story is better or worse than the other. I've looked at all of the coverage, more or less, and it's, again, there are different agendas and there are different objectives.
As Russians and many Ukrainians see it, the Western and international media have objectives of their own that date back to the Cold War. The toppling of a statue of Vladimir Lenin, which Western journalists saw as symbolic.
As night fell, what could be more symbolic than felling a statue of Lenin?
Actually symbolized some of the shortcomings of the foreign media on this story.
In many ways, it was a conscious reenactment of the toppling of the statue of Saddam Hussein, which, to be honest, made it a bit weird, because the protests started about an agreement with Europe, then they became more or less about everything about the president and his legitimacy. So this kind of old-fashioned historical symbol, many people saw as a bit of a diversion.
And I have to tell you, I thought it was humorous. Who cares about a statue of Lenin? Now, for the West, this is some kind of meaningful moment, revolutionary moment. I think this is the West projecting. This is not the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is long gone.
Toppling down the Lenin was definitely overdone by the Western media, because Lenin is definitely more famous abroad than anything else coming from the post-Soviet world, while for the Ukrainians, Lenin is some kind of figure from the past, and for 20 years Ukraine is independent. Of course, there was some glorification when the Lenin fell down, but definitely by the international media, the story is overdone.
But that's what happens when the global media parachute into a story in a country they know little about. Perhaps the post-Cold War narrative wasn't part of any agenda, but what some see as context, others have already consigned to the dustbin of history. Time and Ukraine have moved on, even if Western journalists think they're back in the USSR.
Now, this all may sound strange to you and your audience, but Yanukovych is the president of Ukraine. Putin is president of Russia. They have interests, mutual interests, but one is not dictating to the other. Hardly. But I point out one thing that's hardly ever mentioned by Western media. Ukraine, given its very, very interesting and troubled history, is never a binary. You're for us or against us. It always has to be a third way. And this is what Ukraine is going to have to resolve one way or another.
The danger with the kind of Western perception of these events is depicting Ukraine as a bystander, or a passive tool, that it's simply being torn apart between Russia and the West. If you look at what people are protesting against in the streets, Russia hardly gets mentioned at all. Russian media, when it misinterprets what's happening in Kiev, sure, they attack that, but their real grievance is against their president.
Our Global Village Voices now on the news coverage of the protests in Kiev.
Media has presented the ongoing protests in Ukraine as one that pits pro-European protesters against a pro-Russian government. But the protesters are always, it seems, presented as a united front with a common goal, and there's no indication that there's any divergence or difference in their ranks. Dichotomies like this are always going to oversimplify what is very often a much more complex situation on the ground.
The activists and independent journalists online were very, very active in covering the protests. There were Facebook groups which now have thousands, hundreds of thousands of followers that have covered the protests and accumulated photos. Independent outlets were doing live streaming online. So actually civic journalists and activists have been very, very much instrumental in covering the protests.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. Having executed Kim Jong-un's uncle, the North Korean authorities are now purging state-controlled news sites of his memory. The late Jang Song-thaek used to be portrayed as a kindly mentor whose experience helped guide his nephew. That all changed December 8th with his very public arrest. Even before his subsequent execution, North Korea watchers were seeing references to Jang removed from articles in the official news agency KCNA. And he was disappearing from official photographs and videos. Then, according to the Seoul-based media monitoring website NK News, came the mass deletion of almost the entire archive of the KCNA website, tens of thousands of articles that were published prior to October. Another 20,000 articles were reportedly removed from the archives of the Rodong Sinmun, North Korea's state newspaper. NK News' director Chad O'Carroll said deleting over 100,000 articles since executing Jang on Friday, we have witnessed an unprecedented purge of both power and the press. Given that such a small percentage of North Koreans can actually access the web, the scrubbing was clearly for the benefit of the world outside the Hermit Kingdom. According to the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists, Iraq is the #1 country on what the CPJ calls its impunity index. That means it's the country where those who kill journalists are most likely to get away with it. On December the 15th, TV presenter Nawras al-Nuaimi was shot and killed in Mosul. Al-Nuaimi worked for the Al-Mosuliya satellite station, which was established in 2006 with funding help from the U.S. She became the 6th journalist killed in Iraq since October, the 5th in Mosul alone. Her murder follows that of Alaa Ador, a Christian journalist working for the Nineveh Al-Ahad television network in November. In October, Al-Mosuliya cameraman Bashar Abdul Qadir Najam and 2 journalists from the Sharqiya television channel, correspondent Mohammed Karim Al-Badrani and cameraman Mohammed Hanem, were also killed in Mosul. A member of the provincial council there, which is responsible for handling issues related to journalists, flat out admitted that officials were powerless. We recognize our inability to do what is necessary to ensure journalists in Mosul are protected. The official told Agence France Presse, we are not even able to protect ourselves. CBS News wants the network of legendary American journalists Edward Murrow and Walter Cronkite is taking a pounding over what it trumpeted to be an exclusive look at the NSA, the National Security Agency. The program aired on the network's flagship current affairs program, 60 Minutes. The reporter John Miller did say at the outset,
I once worked in the office of the Director of National Intelligence,
but it wasn't quite full disclosure. Miller also worked for the FBI and the New York Police Department. Miller's crew got a tour of the NSA facility in Maryland, as well as access to NSA Director Keith Alexander. But viewers hoping for hard-hitting questions on the most intrusive surveillance program anywhere were left wanting.
There is a perception out there that the NSA is widely collecting the content of the phone calls of Americans. Is that true?
No, that's not true.
In just under 27 minutes, not a single voice critical of the NSA was interviewed by CBS. No one was asked about spy chiefs lying to Congress and the courts about what they were up to. But we were told something new about the source of the original story, former NSA contractor Edward Snowden.
At home, they discovered Snowden had some strange habits.
Snowden was described as an eccentric who cheated on his qualifying exams for the agency. The story lit up the Twitter sphere. Amy Davidson of The New Yorker called the Snowden angle character trashing. An NSA expert who refused to be involved in the program called it a puff piece, and Chris Hayes of MSNBC tweeted the 60 Minutes NSA story is somehow worse than Twitter led me to believe. For some reason, CBS producers put up another video on their website in which they revealed the story wasn't even their idea. The NSA approached the network with it. We asked CBS to comment on all of the criticism, but the network did not respond. As for the reporter, John Miller, his work will soon be done. The New York Post has reported he is set to return to an intelligence role with the NYPD, back, it would appear, where he belongs. Back on November 1st, 1.3 million Norwegians had a fun Friday night. They watched a television show about knitting. First, there was 4 hours of discussion on the topic, then another 8 hours of actual knitting. Those 1.3 million viewers represent about 1/4 of Norway's population. The killer ratings for a knitting marathon are the latest success story for a Norwegian broadcasting curiosity called Slow TV. It started a few years back when Norway's public TV channel NRK decided to broadcast live coverage of a 7-hour train ride. 7 hours of clickety-clack, a train rolling down the tracks. Norwegians loved it, and a new kind of reality TV show was born that breaks the conventional rules of television engagement. There's no storyline, no script, no drama, no climax. Since then, Norwegians have taken in a cruise ship's journey up the coast, and there's a lot of fog on that coast. On the surface, it sounds boring, because it is. But something about this TV experiment has gripped Norwegians, so we sent the Listening Post's Marcella Pizarro to Oslo to find out what it is. But first, a warning. Viewers may find some of the images in the following report disappointing.
It's a common value in contemporary television that it needs to be built on strong narrative.
Hey, Seattle PD, we're looking for a Stanley Larson.
Which means you need some kind of a conflict.
I'm telling everyone I'm not happy.
And you need some kind of a development to that conflict. Hopefully, you know, a climax that's really punchy, and then a resolution, and something that's clear and concise and engaging and has a kind of an arc to it.
Unless you're in Norway, where people are tuning in to watch a ferry ride that lasts all summer, minute by minute, second by second, broadcast live. This is slow TV in motion, a new television fad where, well, nothing much happens, really.
Open sea, nothing happens. Like this night, we had quite heavy fog for 3 hours. I think it's boring, but boring in a very nice way. But of course you see mountains, you see people waving, because this is live. People are coming in their boats, they are waving at us.
Filming a boat is not a great philosophical achievement, but it's, I think depth can be many things, and I think the gift of just sitting back and watching nature come at you and move past your window through your television, I think that has a relaxing effect.
Slow TV means a way of getting back to sort of the more calmness. You don't have the shouting that you have in a lot of other TV programs.
You can walk to and from the kitchen, you don't really miss anything. And well, it's there. The same thing's happening when you come back to the TV and take another look. It's just nature passing by most of the time.
It's there, it's even, you know, it's like water. It's like the weather, it's like the mountains, it just flows, it's just there.
Well, it is slow, and it's kind of weird, but there's something about it. Something about a break from the world that we live in today. The world of fast-breaking news, of accelerated information, of Facebook, of Twitter, of a media world gone silly. And even when we want to slow down, we can rarely think of television slowing down with us. Unless you're in Norway, where people gather around the TV set to wind down, as opposed to being wound up. And that not only begs the question about why it's happening, but why it's happening here.
Well, slow TV started as a crazy idea in our TV department in Bergen, when someone said, why don't we just put a camera on the front of a train and just transmit the whole journey. And everybody thought, wow, yeah, that's a crazy idea. Of course we can't do that, but we ended up doing it just to try. We thought originally that maybe this would be biggest as an interactive format, but then we suddenly discovered that people watched it the whole journey. Hundreds of thousands of people watched the journey from start to end.
I do not think they sat down with the postmodern analytical frame of mind saying, what can we do as a reaction to this frenetic culture that we're surrounded with? What can we give people? How can we give them peace of mind, Zen, meditation? It wasn't that at all. It's horrifyingly, painfully boring. I know it's beautiful, but this is absolutely nothing. This has no meaning, absolutely no meaning. There's this guy whose job, his grown-up job is head of a department developing slow TV. That's his job. He goes to work in the morning thinking slow things.
Not so fast. For many, this man is pure genius. Thomas Hellum is one of the brains behind a trail of long-haul, yet very popular TV snooze fests. There was the 18-hour-long broadcast of salmon swimming upstream. And then there was a 7-hour train ride, broadcast live. And let us not forget the riveting 30-hour-long interview. So Norway's public broadcaster may be at the avant-garde of weird and wonderful TV, but they also have a formula that keeps the ratings up while keeping the costs down.
This is very, very cheap if you count up the numbers of minutes produced TV, then it's very, very cheap. Like the snail, we have our house on our back, we eat on board, we sleep on board, and the time we are at work, we make television. We don't drive a big OB van from places to place. We don't use very much time on rigging up and down, but we use the time to produce actually hours of TV.
There's a lot of crews, a lot of time, a lot of man hours go into this that could have been spent on producing actual content, which is, of course, another debate that we have in Norway, because Denmark, Sweden are producing high-quality drama, and we want that as well.
But if slow TV is so wrong, then why do Norwegians feel it's so right? It's not the first time we see this kind of screensaver TV in action. There are channels in North America whose sole purpose is to show a log fire burn at Christmas. It's just that in Norway, they seem to have gone overboard. This year, NRK broadcast a 12-hour wood-burning session on primetime TV. 1 million viewers were gripped. That's 20% of the population.
Bonfires have something magical to it, and we discovered that when we transmitted the bonfire for 8 hours.
My daughters say that every time when they find me sitting in front of slow TV, they find it intolerable. It hurts their accelerated heads. But I pay no attention to them. I just keep on, floating with the boat.
More Global Village Voices now on the uniquely Norwegian phenomenon known as slow TV.
In many ways, slow TV goes against what is normally perceived as the success recipe for a television show, where things have to happen quickly, they have to happen all the time throughout the whole show. And that is obviously difficult when you're watching a salmon swimming up a river for 18 hours. There is only so much that can happen. But that's the thing as well that keeps people glued to the television screen, as that you want to be there in case something happens.
What's slow TV's magical formula? What makes it so popular? We have a unique opportunity to watch ourselves on television. Norway is a very small country, 4 or 5 million people, and when the boat passes your particular village, you get to go out, wave to the camera, and get to watch yourself on TV. Also, traveling the boat can be tremendously expensive. Now you can watch it not only live on television, you can also watch it for free on webcam.
Finally, it's been the biggest media story of the year, and with Christmas almost upon us, one organization has found a fun way to combine the two. It's the NSA spy scandal meets Santa Claus through a new campaign video from the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. This video is a parody of the 1930s classic, Santa Claus is Coming to Town. The ACLU has turned a cheery Christmas number into a darker piece about mass surveillance and the larger question of who's being naughty and who's being nice. About 1 million hits later, we've made the NSA is Coming to Town our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at the Listening Post.
You better watch out, you better not Skype, you better log out, yeah, you better not type. The NSA is coming to town. You're making a list, they're checking it twice, they're watching almost every electronic device. The NSA is coming to town. They see when you are sleeping, They hear while you're awake. They know who you call and who you write, so encrypt for goodness sake. With Congress in the dark and a cloak and dagger court, we're looking for answers and they're coming up short. The NSA is coming to town. The NSA is coming to town. The NSA is coming to town.